was another one. Remember that thing in the Bush administration? Shelter in place. Then they would have refinery that would blow up in Texas, and they announced to people, just shelter in place. Well, what fool is going to stay where the refinery is about to blow? Everybody got in their cars and beat it out of there. So they wanted to see how gullible people were, because that was going to be one thing. They'd say, well, we know there's a tsunami coming, big tidal waves, so everybody shelter in place, and then they drowned. Well, people aren't that dumb. So it never came about, but it is the very wealthy, politically powerful, religious elite. If you want to call them Illuminati, that's another description for some of these members. They think that they think they run the world now. They want to be in that position in the future. They don't want to give the populace information about what's coming, the coming pole shift, so that they can make their own decisions. They want the common man marching in place, going to their jobs, keeping the plumbing and electrical and everything running, the roads in good repair. They don't want to tell you what's coming, because when they want to run to their bunkers, they don't want your methy panic cluttering up the road, and they don't care. Now, that's who's running the world, and it is what happens on third density planets. This is, if you go back in history, you probably have this. You have Genghis Khan and Hitler and it's slavery, and I don't know that much about history to be able to rattle it all off, but this is nothing new. Ivan the Impaler, who's this guy that was supposed to be what the vampire legend was based on, Ivan the Impaler, 20,000 people. He'd pick them up, and there's a sharpened pole, and boom, the body goes over it, and then there they rise for days, slowly dying. They can't get off the spike. They're in pain. Anytime they become conscious again, there they are. I mean, who would do that? But this guy is Ivan the Impaler. And Stalin was responsible for what? 40 million deaths of his country? I mean,
in one I wanted to, since you're on the subject of Vlad or Dracula, because, I've definitely spoken with a lot of individuals in regards to those who do open up channels and also know how to play host and to take the deities or the whatever life form that it is, as long as it's on a superplus dimension, into their body. And what we've definitely noticed is that with the Merovingian Empire and even with the Templar Empire, of them being heavily related, especially with the Norse and the Celtic gods, to reptilian life forms and draconic beings, which is definitely a big portal that everyone that is definitely into communication and channeling can attest to being open, as far as that type of communication, almost that being the easiest type of communication, because their dimensions are a lot closer to ours. What I wanted to talk about is what do you do in the case where, because of course, I mean, we know a lot here about, the Great White Brotherhood and definitely the Tibetan and the white gloves and the green gloves and their whole network underground with Shambhala into the center of the earth and Agartha. And since the Zetas have told you that that's something that doesn't exist, but we definitely have even some of the highest, even Edgar Cayce himself, that knows of and spoke often about in his books about the center of the earth and those of the Great White Brotherhood and the Darrows. What do you do when their information conflicts with directly what we know to even be something we can access now?
Right. I understand what you're saying, and this is something that the Zetas have been asked about many, many times, and from the start. What about what Edgar Cayce said, or David Scallion, or this or that? What about the differences? And to some degree, they've addressed some things, like they said, like like the new North American continent, a map that Scallion has produced, and said, well, the West Coast is going to get flooded and this and that. And the Zetas had said, except for the fact that, the Pacific will wash over the coastal mountains and flood, the inland valleys, and it'll take weeks to drain, there won't be anything going up over the Sierras all the way to the Colorado border, for instance. It's not going to happen. So why that difference? And also Edgar Cayce said, well, Virginia Beach will be a safe place. It's right on the coastline. Every part of the coastline is going to have 500 to 600 foot waves coming in. So he explained it to some degree, the Zetas did, as a difference in timing that Cayce was talking about. When the Earth first stops rotation, the water flows to the poles away from the equator, and at that time it will seem that the water is draining away from Virginia Beach, but, blah, blah. Anyway, the bottom line is there is no way to reconcile a lot of prophecy or a lot of what people are getting. In fact, some of these reptilian races lie. And they lie all the surface to self people lie. It's like the people that ran Enron, you know, and they got up there and testified about what they were doing, or they were lying. You know, if you're a controlling, greedy, think only of yourself, lying is part of it. You know, so that lies that are made. They said in describing Satanism that these are service to self spirits that come around. Kill the baby, and you'll get the shiny new red car or the job or the promotion, but just kill the baby, and then the baby gets killed, but you know you never do get the red car or anything like that. But meanwhile, you've sold your soul. In other words, you've moved your soul further along the lines of having no feeling for others. The service to self lie, and they may be getting totally wrong information. So what the Zetas have pointed to when they're pressed, because there are so many sources that are, and on the increase, people that come forward and say, this, and I get email from it, you know, this is what my spirit entities tell me, and some of it sounds, you know, not half bad, but my standard answer is I just do Zeta talk, and the Zetas have emphasized from the start, look at our track record. You know, what they have predicted will happen. Like the current weather is exactly what they predicted would happen. They've talked about, you know, the increasing, they knew the Earth wobble was, we have a wobble where our planet X pushes our North Pole away every day and then bounces back. They knew this would cause, you know, higher tides sloshing inland and the like, and that the weather patterns would become, you know, like vertical lines instead of the usual westerlies, you know, that wobble back. So they were describing what was going to happen, knowing that the Wobble Wind Institute, and it's all come about just to say, I have a page called Zeta Talk Accuracy that has probably about 100 different examples of where they have said something, and every month I'm adding a couple of more to that because their predictions come true just in an astonishing manner, and scientific things that human scientists say, blah, 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 and then they say something different, and then years later human scientists say, well, boy, now we know that blah, 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 and it's exactly what the Zeta said. So, you know, people have said, well, Zeta Talk must be a group of scientists talking to Nancy through remote viewing, you know, like intruding on her head with telepathy and feeding her this stuff. It couldn't be, because the Zetas were saying things that human scientists didn't know, and that came about. So this shows that it's not Nancy, and it's also not people. So they said, look at our accuracy track record, and if you want to worry about what we say or our predictions, and that's all they put up as their defense versus any conflict with what somebody else may say.
Okay, I got a couple callers on the line. I'm going to start taking some calls. We have 35 minutes left to the show ends, Nancy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and take a few calls. I'm going to start with, I'm going to say the last 4 digits of your number, and then you may ask your question. Caller number 4255, you're on the air. Do you have a question?
Just listening. Thank you.
Okay, not a problem. Let's see. Caller number 7532, you're on the air. Do you have a question?
Yes, during the polar shift, does the entire crust of the world shift with the poles, or how do you survive an entire shift of the crust?
You're riding a raft. Yes, it does. It's what happens is the entire globe starts to move, and it's a period of an hour, and it's moving so rapidly that the crust and actually all this thick magma stuff that's between the plates and the core rips enough that the crust is floating freely, and it goes a 90-degree angle, so that for instance, Alaska is going to be on the equator, and Antarctica is going to be on the equator, and then it stops. And this is caused by the fact that Nibiru, Planet X, this rogue planet coming in and showing up on Soho, flies over our heads pretty quickly, and it's twisting and turning as it's adjusting to the sun's magnetic flow lines, you know, coming out of its North Pole, so that magnets don't like the two North Poles close together, and we're smaller, much smaller than this passing planet. So we get shoved, and our globe turns so quickly that the crust rips from the core, and it just stays there then. And the core kind of floats around and adjusts in north to south, but now that's why we have wandering poles. In the past, people say, well, the pole must have been here and over here, and ice ages keep moving around. How come there was an ice age over France which at the same latitude in Russia, the mammoths were eating grass and browsing all year, because France was the North Pole at that time. It was just the crust had moved, and yes, it does. So the whole world, it's not really when you're moving that there's a problem, except for the fact that we will have hurricane-force winds as the crust is moving under the atmosphere. To some degree, the atmosphere pulls with the land, pulls along with it. So to some degree, not. To the degree that it doesn't, we will have hurricane-force winds, but no worse than hurricane-force, because there's a break. The atmosphere will only move that fast, according to the state. Not anything like Ed Dames predicted, 300 miles an hour or 500 miles an hour or anything like that.
So will every building fall down then?
Yeah, well, we're going to have Richter 9 earthquakes everywhere. And this means that if you are in a building, I wouldn't be in, they say don't be in a building. Don't be in the cities where bridges will fall down and buildings will drop, and even frame houses. I don't plan to be in my house. They said because there is going to be winds, you should be in a low trench, and then you're out of the winds, and even tornado force winds will ride right over you, and go back to your home afterwards. But be in a trench, cover over with a board or something like that, and that's the best way, because when I say when you fall, it's not the fall that hurts, it's the sudden stop at the bottom, right?
Yeah, right.
You know, and when these plates are moving and they stop moving, they start slamming into each other. The Caribbean plate is small; it'll get ground up like gravel. Indonesia and the Philippines, ouch! You know, not in good shape. You know, some big plates will grind smaller ones up, and this is all defined in the Zeta Talk website in the safe locations. Very elaborate descriptions of what parts of the world can expect. And water on the move is very scary, too, because when the crust is moving, it pulls under bodies of water that don't necessarily stay with. So it's really kind of sloshing that goes back and forth, and where we get 500 to 600 foot high tidal waves moving inland. Even when you're 100 miles inland, you still have to be 200 feet above sea level to escape that tide, which now returns and goes to the other side of the ocean and back and forth till it settles. So when these plates stop moving, they're slamming into each other. That's a Richter 9 earthquake. And there's been a few of them, you know, but buildings do fall down. And the Zetas say, just don't be in one. Don't be in the city. Right. You know, be out in the country, be in a trench. And it's really pretty simple. It doesn't take money to be a survivor. You know, it's really, they said the rich are worse off than the poor. The rich are going to be clinging to their toys and surround themselves with militia. And the militia is going to turn on them. They're going to say, oh, why do I have to let old Mr. Beezer there, you know, bark orders at me? I'll just knock him off and drink his liquor cabinet dry and take over and rape his daughter. You know, so that's where the rich are going to be. But the poor, you know, who are usually much more fit and doing the grunt work all along, you know, learn how to garden, get chickens and goats, you know, have your, you know, rural area and just prepare to rebuild. Hand tools, you know. Yeah. And those who do so may be pleasantly surprised to find that benign aliens are trotting up and shaking your hand or their tentacle or whatever, you know. And,
okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You bet. You there, Isis? Hello?
Yes, Nancy.
Yes.
We got 29 minutes left on the call.
Sure.
And we're going to go ahead and let you tell us what to expect for the year 2010 in terms of, you know, weather and things of that nature. So let me take one more call.
Okay.
Okay, let's see here. Caller number 1873, you're on the air. Do you have a question for Nancy? Hello? 1873? Okay, they're just listening. Caller number 1726, you're on the air. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Well, they didn't have any questions. All right, Nancy. First, let me just plug this in real quick. When you guys get a chance, make sure you check out the website, zetatalk.com, with our special guest, Nancy. Also, make sure you check out our co-host, Seven, at thewords.ning.com. He is the author of the book called The Code to the Matrix. Also, make sure you check out another website called LeninHonorFilms.com. If you get a chance to take a look at his films, they decode a lot of the programming that we all been programming with for a very long time. Also, check out my website, IsisWisdom.com. So make sure you guys check us all out. And we're back with Nancy. Okay, Nancy, we need you to bring us home, and we need you to school us about what can we expect for the year 2010 since they're saying that you know, the polar shift is going to take place, and or since you seem to think? I don't think they said anything to you about that, right? The Zetas haven't told you that, have they?
Right. No, no. Actually, they're very firm about it. They said it's not their choice. The Council of Worlds has said, do not tell mankind the date. You know, this is part of that being our schoolhouse. And but a big part of this is, if the date were known and they were telling the date, then these bad guys, you know, the whole thing about chemtrail, we're going to kill you, we're going to inoculate you, we're going to, you know, whatever, kill off, you know, everybody we don't want to worry about, like the old and the sick and whatever, and they would really take action. You know, they would set forward and mow people down in the streets with their machine guns or whatever. So they don't want those people that think they run the world, you know, that have evil intent toward common man, they don't feel strong enough to do that today. You know, they say, okay, we're percolating along, we're the rich, you know, we run the banks, you know, we're in charge, but we don't want to rock the boat and change any of that and create dissension and riot and rebellion in people. So we don't want to start killing people off like crazy or herding people into railroad cars and taking them to work camps, because we wouldn't get away with it. We have to be close to the time of the pole shift to get away with it. Well, if they knew the date for sure, that as we get close to the date, this kind of stuff would start happening, see? So they're saying what you have to do is not tell the date, because the last weeks come in, and then there's going to be so much trouble and confusion and grief and lack of communication going on in the last weeks that these people will have run to their bunkers and will not be in a position to vaccinate you, chemtrail you, whatever. And the Zetas have been allowed to say, the pole shift will happen at the end of a magnetic trimester. Well, what the heck is that? Years ago, when they were doing crop circle analyses, they said trimesters run, you know, from January through the end of April, and then through the end of August, and then through the end of December. And sure enough, I found the HARP documentation where they do record the magnetosphere up in Alaska, lined up to show that each of those 4 months, the documentation was different in accordance with what the Zetas said, which was strongest and weakest. So they said it's either going to be the end of April and August or December, but we won't say which, and we won't say which year, right? Then recently I had recall of some more detail that I got on the kind of disturbing changes that can happen, you know, where that includes some new Madrid adjustments, some volcanoes blowing up in the West Coast, but it also included part of the Mediterranean floor just dropping north of Algiers, and a lot of problems in Indonesia where that plate that they're on would be pushed down as the Pacific compresses, and so that islands would just disappear, you know, and pretty quickly. Not a tsunami, but just the land dropping, this kind of thing. And the impression I got was that these were going to be Earth changes that were not part of the pole shift, and not part of even the last weeks, but just the kind of as it gets worse. Now, the last weeks, the Zetas have said, will happen within a 4-month period, so that within that magnetic trimester. What they encompass is a severe wobble, and I mean, you know, the North Pole going all the way to the side and then flipping all the way to the other side, you know, so that it's almost like a top spinning, and as it begins to lose its spin, it goes woo, 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 you know, like that. Now, that follows with the Earth flopping over so that the North Pole is pointed to the left while Planet X is coming from the right, and it stays there, laying on its side, and then it swings its North Pole away from the sun altogether into what has been prophesied as the 3 days of darkness, which is what the Zetas say will happen. And it's really for the northern hemisphere. The southern has 3 days of continual sunlight. And then, because it's swinging and it overcompensates by momentum, it almost comes a little bit to where the North Pole is pointing to the right, having swung, and as the Earth gradually straightens up. So it's perceived by the people in the North American continent to be 6 days of the sun coming slightly from the west. Then the Earth is up, and Planet X is up, and now we're side-by-side magnets, and Planet X will be drawing the Earth toward it because of gravity and magnetic attraction. We will actually close, you know, it'll be halfway between the Earth and Sun at maybe 43 million miles or so. We will close to be within 14 million miles of Planet X instead of 43 million miles away. That's a lot of And so we're moving toward the sun, and we're moving toward Planet X, and it's growing like a huge writhing thing in the sky. And then as that happens, the Earth gradually slows rotation because Planet X is grabbing at the Atlantic Rift, which is a surface magnet, and it grabs it and stops it, so that we have a long day over Egypt and a long night on the west coast of the Americas, and China's in the dark too. And that stays that way for 5.9 days, and then there's the hour of the pole shift. Now, they've told us all these steps and stages. By that time, by the time we get in a severe wobble, the powers that be, the rich people, the politically powerful, you know, the religious elite, the Pope will not be in Rome anymore. They will have run to their bunkers, you know, because people, and just, that's it. You know, nobody's answering the phone, and because they won't be able to have control of the military. They won't be, satellites will be torn out of the sky. Communications will be, you know, it'll be a nightmare, electromagnetic disturbance you can imagine, right? And so therefore, the common man, you know, can take themselves to safety and sort it all out. And yes, there will be Mad Max gangs and things, but, you know, in general, the Zetas have said they don't really run things like in the Mad Max movies. They kill each other off. They loot until they can't anymore, and then they kill each other off. And the good guys form very strong communities that defend themselves, and the world soon sorts out to be a home for the good-hearted, you know, and the like. So they will not tell us what the date is, and any particulars, like this is what's going to happen in 2010, anything that would give a clue as to whether the pole shift is going to happen in 2010, they won't say. They will only say, these are the steps, and this is, you know, it'll all happen within a trimester. Watch for the signs. And beyond that, we're just left to wonder, is it going to be 2010, 2011, 12, 13, 15? We don't know. Are you there?
Yes. Sorry about that. I had the thing on mute. I have some people in my audience. One person had asked the question. I guess you had a show back with Coast to Coast back in April of 2003, right, with George Norrie, and they were saying that you had predicted at that time that there was supposed to be a pole shift back then, but it didn't happen. Yep. So, you know, can you elaborate on what happened with that?
Absolutely. Took me by surprise, too, because I absolutely believed that Zeta said up until from 1995 until that time, they said shortly after May 15th, 2003. I mean, I ran my charge cards up to the max, right? You know, I was in a distressed situation. It took me forever. I've been living under poverty, you know, up until just recently because I had to pay all that stuff off. And I really believed it. And they said it didn't come into the solar system. We tracked that bugger in, as I said, according to the Zeta Talks X and Y in the sky, in observatories, infrared, in CCD imaging. It came in. It was where they said it would be, when they said it would be, and it moved in next to the sun, got lost in the glare of the sun, and we now know it's showing up on SOHO, etc. But it didn't pass, right? And so, of course, the first question was, why did you do this? Why did you say this? And they wrote it, and actually the lengthy explanation of everything is on my website as a link on the left-hand side menu bar, 2003 or something like that, PS 2003. In essence, they did it because they said, at that time, George Bush and the group that put him and Cheney in the White House and had all these plans to chemtrail and poisons, and they wanted to go into Iraq and sit on the oil fields. So the major oil fields are Iraq, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. These are the known reserves, right? And after the pole shift, oil is going to be black gold because it will give you energy, and it will also, it's like a commodity, you know. So they wanted to be kings of the world, and it was their intent to go into Iraq on whatever excuse. As we know, you know, they had plans to invade Iraq even before 9/11 happened. It was the first word out of their mouth practically when they got in the White House, and they wanted to do that for the oil. So it was too soon. In April of 2003, the UN inspectors hadn't even finished their work, and it was like, never mind, get out of the way, we're invading. So they invaded just ahead of May 15th, too soon, and they shot themselves in the foot. And they were never able to succeed. They were shown for what they were. It was the beginning of the end for them, and it was done to undercut the Bush-Cheney administration. The U.S. military has the largest military in the world. In fact, all other militaries combined are not as large as the U.S. military. I mean, Russia, Germany, everybody. everybody combined is not as large as the U.S. military, and therefore they were going to rule the world, and this was to undercut them, to make them flounder and stop. So they called it a white lie, and they said, our apologies to those who put themselves out to be in a safe place. You won't regret it, because things are still going to get bad. It's still going to happen, and if you move to the country and set up, you're not going to be sorry. When the time comes, you're going to say, at least I got a good head start. So that was what they've said to people, and they made no apologies to me either. I was used. However, I have seen what the Bush administration intended to do, and I've seen what the outcome has been, and so c'est la vie. I survived, and I'm not complaining, but it was very painful for me, I can tell you that.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of, I forgot the name of the lady. I think it was back in the spring. I can't remember the exact date, but the lady that had predicted that we were going to actually have first contact, and she had put everything on the line. I can't think of her name off the top of my head.
Me neither.
But it was like all over, you know who I'm talking about, right? It was like all over the internet and all over YouTube, and they were doing like commercials for it and everything, and then they didn't show up, and then, I know the lady wanted to go hide and crawl under a rock after that. And my thing is, Nancy, when I see things like that, I have to question the beings that are being communicated to.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's with a critical,
and she was undoubtedly very sincere, and maybe she misunderstood, or they tried to get something across, or maybe, in fact, it was on purpose to heighten interest in first contact, something like that, to heighten interest, everybody got real intent. Oh, it didn't happen, but more and more people are starting to think about this, so that it can appear that she might have been used, but maybe the outcome was beneficial. And the person almost volunteers. This is really heavy combat. This is war. It's not for the lighthearted. And you go into it. And the way I describe it is, I went to war and I'm not coming back. This is combat, and some heavy maneuvers might have to be done. But I expected to have a life of pain, misery, and anguish. By being in contact with the Zetas and going forward in public. And going forward and putting up that website and participating in chats and interviews. It can get pretty savage, and I anticipated that. But in the end, when I look back after this life is over, I'm going to say, is what I did and what I participated in, was that overall a beneficial thing, and do I feel good about this life, this lifetime?
Right. So what can we expect as far as weather changes for 2010 in terms of when can we start? When do you feel that we'll start to see more changes in terms of like the little thing, the tetra? What's it called? The tetra something?
Tetrahedron.
Yes, it's tetrahedron.
Four triangles, in kind of like a floating pyramid thing, which has like two sides and a bottom, and it's a tetrahedron. Actually, it's happening pretty fast, and I think we're going to see that kind of a pace keep up. My feeling right after that came out, and that thing in Norway, that swirl, the neon cloud and the cloud that swirled, it was like a type of lightning grounding, they said. These neon clouds are from the tail of Planet X, which is wafting the Earth now and then, and it's greasy elements that create neon clouds. My first reaction was, what's next? And the way I read me is that my subconscious knows that we're going to start having a lot more really unexpected things happening. Now, the Zetas have said it's not linear. It kind of plateaus. It seems to plateau, but it's always building up. We keep getting more and more earthquakes. The USGS keeps lying about their strength and frequency, but people say, man, my house was shaking and the windows rattled and this and that and the sinkhole over in the neighbor's yard and something's going on, and the USGS says, oh, no, everything's normal. There was no earthquake. And so it's gotten to the point where people don't believe NASA, and they don't believe the USGS, and they just don't believe any of these official sources that are trying to tell them everything is normal. Earthquakes are on the increase. Volcanic activities on the increase. We're getting signs in the sky, halos around the moon, these weird swirls and neon clouds, and a lot of lightning displays, and weird cloud shapes. So this keeps getting worse and worse all the time, and that's not going to back off. It's just going to continue to get that way. Sinkholes are absolutely epidemic. Bridges falling down, huge sinkholes opening up, trains derailing because all of a sudden the conductor will say, man, the thing is zigging and zagging in front of me, and whoops, I've derailed. Interference with electrical system, like Air France 447 that went down into the Atlantic. All electrical systems just stopped. And then we had some trains, that there was, I think, was a DC train, that it didn't work right. These little controls they have to say there's a train up in front, you have to slow and automatic braking kind of thing. Failure of these planes and trains, and dams are blowing up. We had a dam in Brazil that just stopped, because it got an electromagnetic pulse, and southern half of Brazil and all of Paraguay, just that's blackout, and it wasn't a tree fell on an electric line or anything like that. Well, and we had one in Russia, the Sanyo-Sushka, I can never pronounce that right. A big transformer blew up because it was an electromagnetic pulse, and it sped it up, and it exploded. So this kind of thing will increase. So we have imploding buildings where the bottoms, the rock or the ground under the buildings just drops, and the plumbing and everything falls, pulling the building like a pucker down, into its parking structures or underneath. And we'll have more of that. We've already had some of that, but it'll get a lot more frequent. Earth farts, where the ground moves and the rock layers shift and slide over moldering vegetation that had been trapped during a prior pole shift, and everybody smells rotten eggs, and some people get sick and have to be taken to hospitals. We had one in January of 2007, all the way from London, all across the United States, from New York all the way across, over to Australia, where we were having all of this on the same darn day. So because the Earth adjusted on that day, and it was a lot of methane released. So we're going to have an increasing amount of that. They can't say just what day or to what extent, or is it going to get to the extent where we're into the last weeks because they're not allowed to. But one thing you can be sure of, it's going to keep increasing.
Okay, Seven, do you have a question?
Actually, yeah, I just wanted, it looks like it's going to be the end of the show, so it's the top of the hour. And I just didn't want to open up any questions that couldn't get answered, seeing that we have how much time left in the show?
I have 7:52.
7 minutes. Yeah, we got 7 minutes.
Oh, okay, so we do have a little bit of time. My final question would be the amphibian life forms that have you run into in communicating with these beings, them explaining anything about a war going on? I mean, basically the direct question. When the Nibiru passes, there was supposed to be actually their ship holds stasis, which is the ship itself is not so much as a planet just passing, but an actual a stopover. And as the Egyptians talked about with Planet X and the Sumerians. So and there's beings that are from Nibiru actually here, and when the ship gets here, it makes a stop. Do you know anything about the stop, since we've only talked about the planet just coming through and keep going?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think in the past, what they did when Nibiru came through, they would have shuttles going back and forth to Earth, hauling their gold over to their home planet, and probably refurbishing the crew that they had on Earth, to continue the mining operations. And so there were shuttles, and during Egyptian times, I think the Anunnaki were on Earth even 5 to 10,000 years ago when they built the Great Pyramids, and they built the Sphinx, according to the Zetas, and everybody that's looking around trying to do carbon dating on anything organic over there is saying somewhere between 5 and 10,000 years, So that's not that long ago. They were still on Earth and not yet chased away. But any shuttling of gold is coming from that moon off of Mars and other places, not the Earth. They haven't been accumulating gold, and they don't want to mess with Earth anymore. We have a greater population. Our technology is equal to theirs. We have shuttles. We have lasers in that type. We have the bomb. So they don't want to mess with us. They don't want us going to their home planet and trying to bomb it or something and having to try to field that kind of trash. So I don't think there is anything going to happen. However, it's very interesting you bring up, the Zetas talked about wars, and a lot of people say, well, I think I see like Star Wars up there. It must be aliens fighting it out. The rules are so specific. When they go into a prison planet, they can fight with each other, but they cannot fight with everybody else. All the good guys, the 95% that are good guys, They don't fight with each other, and so they don't have wars. They might have disagreements. They go to the Council of Worlds, they thrash it out, but they don't have wars. But the guys that are control freaks, they have wars, and it's actually just brutal reduction to a pecking order, with much death and just horrible destruction. But that's not allowed to be around a young planet like Earth. They can do that somewhere else, and they just are allowed to hack at each other until it's done. So, yeah, there is wars, but only among the service to self, that 5% that are, and their prison planet, they can do unto each other anything they want to, but they cannot affect the rest of the universe like the good guys or young planets. It's the prison planet culture is all out, knockout, but that's not going to happen around us.
Okay.
Okay. Let me see how much time we got left.
3-4 minutes.
Yeah, we got 3-4 minutes left. I'm trying to see. Let me just check the chat room and see if anybody had any other questions. Okay. All right, Nancy. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. It looks like they're all questioned out over here. People are saying thank you very much for the interesting info. When you guys get a chance, make sure you check out Nancy's site, zetatalk.com. That is zetatalk.com. I think there is a portion of her site that will let you know
was another one. Remember that thing in the Bush administration? Shelter in place. Then they would have refinery that would blow up in Texas, and they announced to people, just shelter in place. Well, what fool is going to stay where the refinery is about to blow? Everybody got in their cars and beat it out of there. So they wanted to see how gullible people were, because that was going to be one thing. They'd say, well, we know there's a tsunami coming, big tidal wave, so everybody shelter in place, and then they drowned. Well, people aren't that dumb. So it never came about, but it is the very wealthy, politically powerful, religious elite. If you want to call them Illuminati, that's another description for some of these members. They think that they think they run the world now. They want to be in that position in the future. They don't want to give the populace information about what's coming, the coming pole shift, so that they can make their own decisions. They want the common man marching in place, going to their jobs, keeping the plumbing and electrical and everything running, the roads in good repair. They don't want to tell you what's coming, because when they want to run to their bunkers, they don't want your messy panic cluttering up the road, and they don't care. Now, that's who's running the world, and it is what happens on third density planets. This is, if you go back in history, you probably have this. You have Genghis Khan and Hitler and it's slavery, and I don't know that much about history to be able to rattle it all off, but this is nothing new. Ivan the Impaler, who is this guy that was supposed to be what the vampire legend was based on? Ivan the Impaler, 20,000 people. He'd pick them up, and there's a sharpened pole, and boom, the body goes over it, and then there they writhe for days, slowly dying. They can't get off the spike. They're in pain. Anytime they become conscious again, there they are. I mean, who would do that? But this guy is Ivan the Impaler. And Stalin was responsible for what? 40 million deaths of his country? I mean,
I wanted to, since you're on the subject of Vlad or Dracula, because, I've definitely spoken with a lot of individuals in regards to those who do open up channels and also know how to play host and to take the deities or the whatever life form that it is, as long as it's on a super plus dimension, into their body. And what we've definitely noticed is that with the Merovingian Empire and even with the Templar Empire, of them being heavily related, especially with the Norse and the Celtic gods, to reptilian life forms and draconic beings, which is definitely a big portal that everyone that is definitely into communication and channeling can attest to being open, as far as that type of communication, almost that being the easiest type of communication, because their dimensions are a lot closer to ours. What I wanted to talk about is what do you do in the case where, because of course, I mean, we know a lot here about, the Great White Brotherhood and definitely the Tibetan and the white gloves and the green gloves, and their whole network underground with Shambhala into the center of the earth in Agartha. And since the Zetas have told you that that's something that doesn't exist, but we definitely have even some of the highest even Edgar Cayce himself, that knows of, and spoke often about in his books about the center of the earth and those of the Great Bright Brotherhood and the Darrows. What do you do when their information conflicts with directly what we know to even be something we can access now?
Right, right. I understand what you're saying, and this is something that the Zetas have been asked about many, many times, and from the start. What about what Edgar Cayce said, or David Scallion, or this or that? What about the differences? And to some degree, they've addressed some things, like they said, like like the new North American continent, a map that Scallion has produced, and said, well, the West Coast is going to get flooded and this and that. And the Zetas had said, except for the fact that, the Pacific will wash over the coastal mountains and flood, the inland valleys, and it'll take weeks to drain, there won't be anything going up over the Sierras all the way to the Colorado border, for instance. It's not going to happen. So why that difference? And also Edgar Cayce said, well, Virginia Beach will be a safe place. It's right on the coastline. Every part of the coastline is going to have 500 to 600 foot waves coming in. So he explained it to some degree, the Zetas did, as a difference in timing that Cayce was talking about. When the Earth first stops rotation, the water flows to the poles away from the equator, and at that time it will seem that the water is draining away from Virginia Beach, but, blah, blah. Anyway, the bottom line is there is no way to reconcile a lot of prophecy or a lot of what people are getting. In fact, some of these reptilian races lie. And they lie all the service to self people lie. It's like the people that ran Enron, and they got up there and testified about what they were doing, or they were lying. If you're a controlling, greedy, think only of yourself, lying is part of it. So that lies that are made, they said in